segment 4 in our study of anti-Semitism. And this particular session is anti-Semitism in the history of the church. Remember last night, our last session, I dealt with the historical foundation, the anti-Semitic historical foundation of replacement theology. Not accusing replacement theology guys today of being personally anti-Semitic. I'm not doing that. Just saying there is some anti-Semitism streams flowing into the formation of replacement theology in the early church. And so now I'm going to move to kind of the next section, which is the next logical section, which is, let's do a history lesson of anti-Semitism in the history of the church. I'm going to chop that off around the Spanish Inquisition and Reformation time, because I have another session dealing with modern anti-Semitism. But let's get into it today. I'm starting today, not back early in the church, but just for fun. I put up this slide as my starting slide. Michelangelo's Moses with Horns, 1513. Have you ever seen that? Okay, and you'll see other statues. In fact, you'll see this is on the front of a church. They're in Italy. It's in Italy. I forget which exact church it was. It's not the Pope's church, but it's another church, and I think it's in Rome. It's another church, and so it's a very famous statue. Okay, and you look at that, and right away you can see how people would say, "Oh man, Christians with halos, and the Jews with horns, devilish." You can see how people took that. But we don't want to go too far with that. In fact, where does that come from? In the Latin Vulgate translation of the Bible, if you go, in fact, you have your English Bible, go to Exodus. Exodus 34. (34:29), book of Exodus. And it came about when Moses was coming down from Mount Sinai, and the 2 tablets of the testimony were in Moses' hand as he was coming down from the mountain, that Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because of his speaking with him. So when Aaron and all the sons of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. Then Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the rulers of the congregation returned to him, and Moses spoke to them. And afterward all the sons of Israel came near, and he commanded them to do everything that the Lord had spoken to him on Mount Sinai. And when Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face. But whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would take off the veil until he came out. And whenever he came out and spoke to the sons of Israel what he had been commanded, the sons of Israel would see the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face shone. So Moses would replace the veil over his face until he went in to speak with him. So the controversy there is the translation of the Hebrew word keren. It can mean radiance in the sense of shining, or it can mean horns. And Jerome in the Latin Vulgate translated it horns. And he was following, actually, some advice for some Hebrew Jewish guys who were helping him with the translation. He'd consult them with that. And there were many Jews who took this passage as Moses came down and God had given him horns. Has nothing to do with the devil. That's kind of a modern conception, right? I mean, do we ever have a description of Satan with horns in the Bible? No, he's more likely described as an angel of light. Okay. Anyway, horns is the translation of the Latin Vulgate. And so all that Michelangelo is doing here, he's not being anti-Semitic, but he is just following the Latin Vulgate translation. But let's think a minute about that. Could horns possibly be what's going on here? Can you think about that? Just think about the context of the passage? Does horns make sense? You've probably never heard that before, so you have to think about it. It doesn't seem to make sense. Let's go over to 2 Corinthians 3. Apostle Paul has some things to say about the veil, doesn't he? Chapter 3, 2 Corinthians 3, verse 12. Having therefore such a hope, we use great boldness in our speech, and are not as Moses, who used to put a veil over his face, that the sons of Israel might not look intently at the end of, notice the words, what was fading away. Now, can horns fade away? They can drop off, like deer horns, antlers. But the fading away idea much better fits the idea of radiance than horns. So I don't think there's a shot in the dark that the passage in Exodus is talking about horns. But that's there, and I thought I would share that with you. And there have been some unfortunate Christians or professing Christians who have run with that a little bit and used it to speak ill of Jewish people. So you need to be aware of that. Now I want to review this again. I'll probably do this 2 or 3 times through. I just want you to get this. Activities that are not automatically anti-Semitism. We discussed some of those. Do you remember that from yesterday? Military opposition to Israel by nations in the Old Testament. New Testament texts that portray Jewish opposition to Jesus and Christianity. They're not automatically anti-Semitic. Debates against Judaism by Christians. Just because we oppose Judaism in some way and speak against Judaism does not make us anti-Semitic. And remember, there is a big difference between rabbinical Judaism and the literal understanding of the Old Testament. And Jesus had a lot of negative things to say about the rabbinical tradition. And we follow Jesus on that. And Jesus was not being anti-Semitic, but many Jews will take it that way. Criticism of Israel as a nation in the world today is sometimes considered anti-Semitic, but remember, we can criticize Israel. And then Christians who hold to replacement theology today, I've probably said that 100 times already. We don't want to look at these as automatically showing anti-Semitism. I'll slow down there to give you a chance to fill in the blanks for that. Now, we have a passage that is abused heavily in church history. It may be the most abused passage relative to the relationship of Jews and Christians. And it's Matthew 27:25. When the Jewish mob, the Jewish crowd says, "His blood be on us and on our children." They're talking to Pilate. "His blood be on us and on our children." Now that's them talking. That is not God sanctioning anything. That's not God making a statement. That's not Jesus making a statement. It's just the crowd blurting out, Pilate trying to get him to go ahead and crucify Jesus, and that they will take the responsibility. A little bit later, I'll show you that God does give some responsibility to the Jews for the death of Christ, but he also gives you and me responsibility for the death of Christ. So we're going to talk about that later on. So anti-Semitism is not justified by this idea. But it is a very abused passage, and it's abused very early in the history of the church. We want to walk through a list now. I have examples from church history, and we're going to look at those particular examples, and I've put them in a table form, and it's hard for me to know, as I was thinking through, okay, how should you take notes for this? And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you the advice of John Calvin. Okay. Good luck. Just whatever comes to your mind that you want to write down in that box there about what I'm saying. I don't think it's going to be very effective for you to try to write down every little thing that's going to be up on the screen. I think that will just frustrate you. So let me recommend that you not do that. Maybe capture a couple things or words and stick them down there, okay? And then you can always go back and watch the YouTube thing to fill in your thoughts, right? Think of it that way and try not to be frustrated this morning, all right? All right, Justin Martyr. They see his dates 100 to 165. Many Jews today view Justin's dialogue with Trypho the Jew, about 145 AD, as the beginning of Christian anti-Semitism. Others will blame the New Testament itself. But when you get to the church fathers, it's usually Justin Martyr. And it's a little unclear whether Trypho the Jew is a real person or if he is just using that as a device for debate in his writing. But either way, the Jewish people often will point to him as the beginning point. And here's some statement. The custom of circumcising the flesh handed down from Abraham was given to you, talking to Trypho the Jew, as a distinguishing mark to set you off from other nations and from us Christians. The purpose of this was that you and only you might suffer the afflictions that are now justly yours. In other words, there's an outward mark, circumcision, and the purpose God gave it to you for was that you might suffer the afflictions that are now justly yours. That's a strong, negative, and hateful statement. Now, Justin Martyr, on the whole, as a church father, is actually very good, very helpful. But then, right in the middle of this, you got this zinger. So where does that come from? He goes on, that only your land be desolated, and your cities ruined by fire, that the fruits of your land be eaten by strangers before your very eyes, that not one of you be permitted to enter your city of Jerusalem. Your circumcision of the flesh is the only mark by which you can certainly be distinguished from other men. Just a negative spirit toward the Jewish people, and this is early. Now, if you want to notice the dates, let me go back. The dates here, in the right smack dab in the middle of his life, is 132 to 135, the Baradak Revolt, where the Romans finally were fed up to the end with the Jews, and they destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD, and in 135 they changed the name to Palestina, and they just pretty much tried to expel all the Jews they could from the land. And so that happened right in the middle of his life. And many Christians back then were, well, maybe God is judging the Jewish people. And it could be that God was judging the Jewish people, but that doesn't mean when he judges that he's not going to restore. See, they were beginning to take the judgment as final, and that's unfortunate. Now we move to Emperor Constantine. Okay, you remember the story of Constantine? Do you remember how he became a Christian? Do you remember that story? Saw a vision. He was about to go into battle. And he had a vision of a cross, wooden cross in the sky. It says, by this sign conquer. And so he was converted. He converted to, I'm going to be a Christian. I'm going to follow that. Now, whether that was truly something he saw or not, it's open to debate. But he had all of his soldiers get baptized. They didn't have any choice in the matter. So it was not really a Billy Graham come forward invitation. It was a emperor come forward, general come forward invitation. And I think one particular version of the story was they had a priest with branches dipping it in water, and that they walked under it on their horses as he did this to them, and they were baptized. And so the whole army became Christian, and he won the battle. And then the whole empire now was Christian, at least controlled by Christians, since the emperor himself was Christian. Now later emperors would not be, and so you have on again, off again, on again, off again for a while, as Christianity is trying to make its way there in the Roman Empire. Well, Constantine, remember, did the 325 Council at Nicaea. Who, by the way, Santa Claus was at that. Did you know that? St. Nicholas showed up. He was one of the bishops at the Council of Nicaea. He was a... What's that?
Isn't that the one where he slapped the guy?
I don't remember that part.
Yeah, we heard a story that at that council, he actually punished Arius.
Oh, Arius. That was Santa Claus. Yeah. Gee, that just ruins my thinking this morning. So anyway, what does Constantine say about the Jews? According to Eusebius in his Life of Constantine, it says, this is the statement by Constantine: "Let us then have nothing in common with the detestable Jewish crowd, for we have received from our Savior a different way." That seems to be strong from our perspective. Now, I think all of you said that you had not been to Israel. So you've not been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is supposedly where Jesus was crucified and buried. And they take you up some steps to a high place inside the church. And there's these rooms. And they have two big murals. One's Greek Orthodox and one's Roman Catholic. This is the Roman Catholic mural. This is supposed to be at the site of the crucifixion. And then you go downstairs, and the big rotunda is the place where was where Jesus was buried. It's very interesting. It's very ornate now, built up enormously, and since the rise of tourism. And the first time I went there in 1980, it wasn't quite that way. And we lined up, and you could go in on one side, but you couldn't walk through it all the way because the people who owned the church building were fighting each other. You have 4 different groups: Catholics, Greek Orthodox, different ones owning the building, and they were fighting with each other. And so, and one side owned one half where his feet lay, and the other where his head lay. And so you can go in one side, but then you had to walk around to go in the other side. You couldn't just walk through. Very interesting way to act and behave in what should be the most holy site in the universe. Of course, it's possible that Jesus was crucified and buried elsewhere, Gordon's Calvary, the Garden Tomb, as it's come to be called. But what's interesting about this mural is that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the church was constructed 326 to 335. So this is a year after Eusebius comes to power in 320, or right after he has not after he comes to power, but after he has the Council of Nicaea. And he sends his mother throughout the empire, especially in Palestine, looking for holy sites and building shrines at the holy sites. And that's unfortunate because they tend to bulldoze down what's there, and you can't see, there's no historical perspective to preserve what's there for historical posterity. So it's a little hard to know when you go in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, is this it? You go to the Garden Tomb and you go to the Gordon's Calvary, and at least it's natural, looks like it was. And so it's helpful. But what's interesting about this mural that they constructed, notice the characters in the painting. Can you see those very easily? Okay, Jesus, of course, is there lying down on the cross. The Virgin Mary is standing, praying. Mary Magdalene is here crying at his feet. Back here, sitting on a rock, is a Jew with a mallet. And the point of this portrait, this mural, is that The Jews crucified Jesus. The Jews killed Christ. And it's right here in the most holy site for Christians in the world. That is very bothersome, that would exist like that. And of course, Christians, with the great ingathering of Gentiles, Christianity is exploding. And of course, the Jewish faith is not. In fact, the Jewish faith becomes very ingrown, and they're not bringing in new converts very much. And so the Jewish people are very small in relationship to the Christian population. And there seems to be nothing they can do to stop the negativity. Ambrose, you see his dates, Bishop of Milan, and in fact it's one of his sermons that helped St. Augustine convert to Christianity or heed a call for ministry. Well, there was a bishop in Mesopotamia, not Ambrose, who encouraged, well, where's Mesopotamia?
Tigris and Euphrates
Okay.
area.
Okay, Iraq, basically where Iraq is today. A bishop in Mesopotamia, not Ambrose, encouraged the burning down of a synagogue in 388 AD. That's not a good thing. That's not any different than what Hitler did in the 1930s. When the Emperor Theodosius ordered it rebuilt, Ambrose wrote a letter encouraging it not to be rebuilt, and saying if you help rebuild it, you are actually helping the killers of Christ. And Ambrose even went to visit the emperor and finally succeeded in convincing him not to help with the rebuilding of the synagogue. And of course, Ambrose is a well-known church leader. So we're not talking about some side weird fellow. John Chrysostom. There's his Facebook picture. He would be today a TV preacher. Who's the guy in Houston? Joel Osteen. I tell you, I like to watch him for the first 5 minutes because he gives really good joke to start with. And after that, I switch the channel. John Chrysostom would be the Joel Osteen of his day. Probably more orthodox. In terms of content, he would be giving more content. But he has a series of sermons, I think there were 8 of them, his homilies against the Jews. He says this: the Jewish people were driven by their drunkenness and plumpness to the ultimate evil. They kicked about, they failed to accept the yoke of Christ, nor did they pull the plow of his teaching. Another prophet hinted at this when he said, Israel is as obstinate as a stubborn heifer. Although such beasts are unfit for work, they are fit for killing. Do you know who made use in modern times of John Chrysostom? The Nazis. They brought out the anti-Semitic statements of the early church fathers, people like this, especially famous ones. I mean, he was called the golden-mouthed orator. He was well known throughout the whole empire. And they pointed to that. You German people need to emulate the great men of the past. We jump ahead a few centuries to Peter the Venerable. Notice 1092, 1156, the Cluny Abbey in France. Yes, you Jews, I say, do I address you, you who till this very day deny the Son of God. How long, poor wretches, will ye not believe the truth? Truly I doubt whether a Jew can be really human. I lead out from its den a monstrous animal, and show it as a laughingstock in the amphitheater of the world. In the sight of all the people, I bring thee forward, thou Jew, thou brute beast, in the sight of all men. I think Peter the Venerable needs a new name. Maybe he had other things that were good, but this is not among them. This is what I think blatant anti-Semitism. Now, what if you had people talk about Texans that way? How would you feel? You wouldn't be happy about that. And the Jewish people are not happy about this. And I'm saying to you that Christian people today should not be happy about this. Then we come to the First Crusade. It's called the first, in some respects, called the first pogrom in Western European history. Pogrom referring to a riot against a particular group of people, and it's used primarily for the Jewish people. The First Crusade started in December 1095, goes to July 1096. And what's interesting, they gathered people together, and of course the ultimate goal is what? To free Jerusalem from the Muslim hordes. But they start in France and in the Rhineland in Germany, what would later become Germany, and they start slaughtering Jewish people in those territories. I guess they were practicing for later. They also, if I remember my history right, when they got to the Dalmatian coast, on their way, they killed more Jews there. And then when they got to Jerusalem, they killed more Jews there. Brutal murder of whole Jewish communities. There's a word for that. It's called genocide. It was done by Christian soldiers in the name of Jesus Christ. So could you understand why a Jewish person today might look at the word Jesus as a negative word? In July 1099, Jerusalem's captured. The Jewish quarter raised death and slavery for Jews. But that's the Catholics, right? Sorry, we got more than just the Catholics. You see the dates on Martin Luther. He wrote a book in 1543. He dies in 1546, I believe. Yeah, there is. 1546. He says this. He says, first to set fire to their synagogues, talking about the Jews, or schools, and to bury and cover with dirt whatever will not burn, so that no man will ever again see a stone or cinder of them. Second, I advise that their houses also be razed and destroyed. Now he stops short. He doesn't say, at least I haven't found it, kill the Jews. But it's like he does want their stuff to be destroyed, so they have to move and go somewhere else. Now I used to say, if Luther, in 1523, Luther said some positive things about Jews. 20 years later, he's changed his mind. And And I got to thinking, if he had just died 5 years sooner, and not written that book, how different the relationship would be between Lutherans and Jewish people, and Protestants and Jewish people. But then I ran across this commentary on Isaiah 63 in 1530. If you have your Bible, let's look at Isaiah 63. Verse 1, who is this who comes from Edom with garments of glowing colors from Basra, this one who is majestic in his apparel, marching in the greatness of his strength? It is I who speak in righteousness, mighty to save. And this is the Messiah. Why is your apparel red, and your garments like the one who treads in the winepress? I have trodden the wine trough alone, and from the peoples there was no man with me. I also trod them in my anger and trampled them in my wrath, and their lifeblood is sprinkled on my garments, and I stained all my raiment. For the day of vengeance was in my heart, and my year of redemption has come. And I looked, and there was no one to help. In other words, I did this myself. The judgment I did myself. And I was astonished, and there was no one to uphold. So my own arm brought salvation to me, the deliverance. I took care of all this. That's his point. And my wrath upheld me. And I trod down the peoples in my anger and made them drunk in my wrath, and I poured out their lifeblood on the earth. Now, and that's strong language that we see in Revelation 19 when Jesus comes back. It's interesting how Luther takes this. Luther takes Edom as the ungodly synagogue, the Jews. But Edom is a place, right? The descendants of Esau, the Edomites. Edomites, Martin Luther says, are red Jews. Remember, Esau comes from red, the very name, red. They're red Jews who are bloodthirsty and murderous. And the sprinkled blood of verse 3 refers to every calamity of the Jews is for the sake of Christ. And the second coming is the final destruction of the Jews. It's almost like he never read Zechariah. You read Zechariah 12 to 14, and in the end, the Messiah comes to deliver Jerusalem and Israel, not to destroy. How could Luther be so right on the authority of the Bible and justification by faith alone and the priesthood of every believer? How could he be so right on those and be so wrong on this? We're not going to let John Calvin off the hook, although in his formal writings, the commentaries and the institutes, it's hard to find any anti-Semitic thoughts. At least I haven't found them. But he does have a sermon. It's entitled "Response to Questions and Objections of a Certain Jew." And I think there was this Jewish person who probably just ticked him off. And so he includes it in a sermon. There the Jews' rotten and unbending stiff-neckedness deserves that they be oppressed unendingly and without measure or end, and that they die in their misery without the pity of anyone. Now let me overlay that with the words of Jesus. Love your enemies. If you want to count them as enemies, Paul says with respect to the gospel, they're your enemies. We should love them. This is not the right attitude. And this comes from, we see Luther and Calvin, the two big cogs of the Reformation, talking this way about the Jews. Now we come down to the Spanish Inquisition. I told you I've been reading a big giant book on that from Benzi and Netanyahu. This is established 1478 by Ferdinand and Isabella. Do you remember Columbus? What was the year for Columbus? 1492. He sailed the ocean blue. The purpose of the Spanish Inquisition was to identify and punish Jews and Muslims who had made false conversions to Christianity. A lot of times, Christians would do similar things to what the Muslims did. The Muslims would come in, say as they swept across North Africa, say, okay, repent, join Islam, or have your head chopped off. Okay, those are your choices. And a lot of people converted. And in Christian lands, Jews were often told to convert or be expelled from the country, or the region, or the city, wherever it was, or face death. Not a whole lot of difference. And so the purpose of the Spanish Inquisition was this, to identify, punish Jews and Muslims who had made false conversions. See, what happens, Jews would feign conversion. Muslims would feign conversion. They would secretly practice their Passover in their home, but in public they would not be Jewish. And Christians, the Christian leaders were trying to root this out. 150,000 people were persecuted over the next 3 centuries. Perhaps as many as 5,000 were executed. It's abolished in 1834. Just 27 years before the Civil War in America. The Spanish Inquisition was still going then. And the Spanish Inquisition is not the only Inquisition that's going on. It's just one of the more famous ones. So as you think about that, let me ask you a question. What people in church history that you're aware of I have not talked about? Okay, Anabaptist, I haven't talked about them.
Messianic Jews.
Okay, haven't talked about those who were Jewish people who came to Christ, other than here in the Spanish Inquisition. And even if you had a genuine conversion to the faith, and you were a Messianic Jew during the Spanish Inquisition, they might not trust your statement of faith. So you're in trouble no matter which way you go, and your Jewish friends hate you. You're in a real pickle there. Well, I'm thinking of individuals primarily. Augustine. Don't really see a lot of statements, other than he does teach replacement theology, but he doesn't really say a lot of super negative things about the Jews. Now, I'm not an Augustine scholar, so I'll have to go study some more perhaps. Jerome. Thomas Aquinas. Zwingli, who the biblical Anabaptists come out of Zwingli's movement. Doesn't seem to say a whole lot of negative things about the Jews. So I could easily have doubled the number of things in this PowerPoint, and we've gone on another hour. And I hope this has been enough to bother you. My point in this presentation was to bother your soul. This is what professing Christians have said about the Jews. And it's hateful slander and libel, accompanied with some genocide. This is wrong. And Christians should always repudiate this. That's why, with the Friends of Israel, one of my goals is to help Jewish people understand there are Christians who love them. And the Christians in Israel, the Jewish people in Israel, most of them understand that better than some other Jewish people in the world. because they realized the friendship of the dispensational pro-Israel faction of evangelical thinking. We are their best friends. Now, how do you feel when you see the information on anti-Semitism in church history? Give me some feedback in your heart and mind as you went through this. How'd that make you feel or think? Yes, sir.
Well, it questions the hermeneutics of the time.
Okay. So they were, at best, not interpreting the Bible correctly. At worst, they were ignoring the Bible. I mean, what does it mean to love your enemies? I mean, they weren't even thinking about that, seems to me. Okay.
Well, since the Bible is a Jewish book, I would say that they're pretty much ignoring it.
Yeah. Remember?
Except where it favors them.
Yeah. Well, you remember last night we went from Jewish Kiliasm to Christian Kiliasm. They were basically de-Judaizing the text, removing Jewish things from the text. And so they were looking at it without the Jewish perspective of the original writings. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Just seems to me that their thinking is so inconsistent when the founder of the Christian faith, being Jesus, is not even recognized apparently as being Jewish.
Hmm.
And it's just sort of throwing it out the window. And
Yeah, Jesus and the apostles are all Jewish. And so how can you be this way? No. Of course, I guess they would say, well, they accepted the Lord. I mean, all the apostles accepted the Lord. The other Jews do not. So, and for those who do not, we have a right to look at you this way.
I mean, I just hate that that puts us lumped in the same category in their mind as the Nazis. I mean, that's to have those pictures propagated even in modern history and to lump us in with groups that are so currently hideous. That's not company I want to even be purported to keep.
Right. Julius Streicher, who was a Nazi, at the Nuremberg trials, when he was put on trial, and I think he was later executed, his defense of himself was to read Martin Luther. And he said, famously, if you're going to judge me and kill me, you need to kill Luther. And he was right about that. And so Luther gave Satan room to criticize Christianity. Any other comments? Yes, sir, Josh?
I think it all serves as a warning for us not to put our, be careful with our presuppositions. Obviously, this type of thinking is coming from somewhere. I mean, obviously, we're rooted in sin nature. But sometimes our allegiance to other things can come before our allegiance to Christ himself and his word.
Hmm.
So whether that's American nationalism or whether that's, and it's to find a balance because we can identify with other things, but we cannot let that supersede.
Yeah. I think it was Eusebius in his history, which was written early 300s. I think he was writing about a particular person who attended the conference, where Santa Claus slapped the guy. Okay, and he makes the statement: as I was walking in the walkway to go into the building, I saw all the Roman trappings, the banners and the flags, and the Roman soldiers were still there, standing guard. And then I got inside the building, and the big auditorium where we were going to sit, and saw all the banners again and the signs and the Roman stuff. And as I walked down the aisle to take my seat, I thought to myself, maybe the kingdom has already started. Where we let the outward happenings affect us and our theology more than the actual words God gave in the text. So we need to be careful on every issue, but especially in this. Friends of Israel, we'd like to reach Jewish people for the Lord. And it's hard to do when you have all of this to overcome. Okay, let's stop there, take a break until 10 o'clock.